Hi everyone, I'm Nicola. I'm an architect, and up until quite recently I was working in my own practice. About start of sort of January this year, I joined the Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust as part of this project as the land and property enabler. So my job description really is about supporting groups and finding suitable properties and land for those groups within Brighton and Hove. So you can imagine it's not the easiest of jobs, but to support you in doing that as well. So it's not just me, it's also obviously you looking for suitable land and properties. And lots of people have asked me through the conversations I've had, so what does that mean? You know, how can we find land and buildings, but also how do we know that they're suitable? How do we know that they're viable? So I'm going to come on and talk about that. That's the major part of the presentation. But I thought it was useful just to get the map of Brighton up, just to start with. And we all know this, obviously. We all know where we live. But it's useful to see how much, in a way, it's sort of hemmed in. And everyone always says this, oh, you know, we're between the downs and the sea, and there's, you know, that's part of the reason why there's so little land and all this sort of thing. But actually, what's also interesting about this map, of course, is the fact that quite a lot of the boundary of Brighton and Hove is actually outside of the urban boundary of Brighton and Hove. So I haven't got a pointery thing. That's something I've forgotten to do. But this dotted line here is the boundary. There's quite a lot of sort of farmland and Southlands National Park that is outside of the boundaries of where you can see the settlements are, I suppose you'd say. This is the A27 bypass. But also on this map to note are the development areas. So in Brighton and Hove's Council's city plan, there's a number of development areas. I think there's 8 of them. And these purple sort of areas are on this map. So what that means is that there are certain areas of the town, city, that have been designated as development areas. One of them is, you probably know of, is Toad's Hole Valley. So that one's there, that's DA7. Shoreham Harbour is DA8. And then there's others like the Marina, for instance, down there. And others like the American Express and Edward Street area. And so on. So this is just sort of gives you an overview, but also to point out that there are areas where the council have said that we need housing and we need to develop those areas. So just to thought it'd be quite interesting to start with that. So I thought it would be interesting to go through this sort of, as I see it anyway, and there's not really a textbook I don't know of about this, but from my background and from doing talking to people, basically, there's the sort of 3 things I'm going to talk about today, and the difference between them and what they actually mean. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is your site or your building criteria. So in other words, what do you need? What do you actually want? And that's if you haven't done that yet, and I know some groups here have done that. But I think quite a lot of groups or people that are just starting on this journey probably haven't really started to think in detail about what their criteria might be. So that's the first step, really. And then once you've got that list of things that you need, then what sort of building would suit that, or what sort of land would suit that criteria? So then it's a case of assessing the building or the land that you might find as to whether or not that's actually suitable for what you actually want. And the second part of that, B, the suitability, is it actually developable? So it might be that you found a fantastic plot of land or a fantastic building, but you can't do anything with it for various reasons. So we'll come on and talk about that. And the third thing is what people refer to as viability, and I think there's some confusion about what viability actually means, but I think what it means is that is it viable financially? So the other things deal with if it's viable development-wise, and is it viable for you, but the third thing is about finance. It's all about finances and whether it actually stacks up. Okay, so the first part of that, those three elements then, the criteria. So what does your group need? So we're talking about quite detailed things here. I mean, some of you were mentioning earlier that you wanted 8 to 10 houses or 8 to 10 units. But is that actually houses? Does it have to be houses? Could it be flats? And how big? You know, you might say 2 bedrooms, but I know there's one group here called Lilliput who have been talking about mini houses, 50 square metres. So they're thinking outside the box in a way. I mean, that is very small. But it's an interesting way of thinking about actually what you need and really getting into the detail of what you actually need. So maybe don't just think about a 2-bedroom house being 75 square metres or 80 square metres and 3-bedroom house being 100 square metres or whatever. Think about, maybe what you actually need. And of course, if you've got shared space, then presumably the actual units that you're living in could be a bit smaller. And of course, the smaller the units, the cheaper potentially the solution. So that's something to bear in mind. And also, if you're building houses and they can be a bit smaller, then that will affect the size of the site. But we'll talk about how. Well, I'll just come on to the size of the site now. So say, for instance, you've got 20. You really want 20 dwellings, and you are going to talk about a sort of average size of about 75 square metres per dwelling. With a high density of 50 units per hectare is actually a really quite high density. So I'll come on to talk about what. Okay, let's talk about a hectare now. Okay, so a hectare, if people don't know, is about the size of almost half an acre. It's not quite half an acre, if people can visualise what an acre is. And it's about this. This is why I've got a picture of Trafalgar Square up there, because that's about a hectare. Trafalgar Square is the area of about a hectare, and it's 2 football pitches put together. It's about 100 metres by 100 metres, basically. That's a hectare. So going back to the calculation, 20 dwellings of about 75 square metres, with a density of 50 units per hectare. So you would need about 0.4 of a hectare. So that's about 20. That's for 20 units, and it's saying there what a hectare is. So it's 100 metres by 100 metres, about 10,000 square metres. Okay, so talking a bit further then about criteria. Not just about the size of what you need, but also where do you want to live. So I think most of you would ideally like to live inside Brighton and Hove boundary. But obviously within Brighton and Hove there's an urban side to that, there's a suburban side to that, there's some rural, slightly more rural areas, and there's also areas near to the sea. Do you want an open aspect, or are you quite happy with being in a more sort of urban aspect, do you want it to be busy and lots near shops and that sort of thing? Do you want space for growing? Do you want shared garden space? So all of these things like transport links and schools, of course, cycling distances to various things. Maybe you need some cars. If you need cars, because it depends on how far out you are, I imagine, from the town centre. How many cars do you need? How many spaces will you need? So those are the things that you need to think about where you want to be as well. And also, what sort of site or building do you want? So are you happy? I think there was a group over there that wanted perhaps to repurpose or renovate an existing property. So what sort of size of property are you looking at? How many units do you need that could be fit in there, or how many rooms do you need that could fit in there? Could you repurpose it? Could you change it around so that it works for you? And are you interested in brownfield sites or greenfield sites? So a brownfield site is one that's previously been developed. That's the definition of a brownfield site. So in other words, the second image down there, that's a brownfield site. It's got a building on it at the moment. And a greenfield site is the lower picture there that hasn't been developed. So the bit that's surrounded in red is basically just a field, and that's a greenfield site. But importantly, what can your group afford? And I think some of you have said that you have got some assets, some of you haven't. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do anything because you haven't got any assets, but I think it's important to know if you have got assets, how you could then use those assets to maybe get a mortgage from with that, or are you thinking that you might want to rent at the end of it on a long lease, rent the land, rent the building? Do you want to actually buy it? And because if you can rent on a long lease from the council, for instance, which is what Bunker have done, then you've got a you can run your own co-op there. You're still to some extent dependent on the council and the lease, but I think they've got 99 years, haven't they? Yeah. So that's fairly secure. But obviously, the more you can afford to buy the ground that you're actually living on, the more secure you are. So it's very important at quite an early stage that you get to grips with that and how you might actually fund what you're wanting to do. And as Andrea said earlier, is sort of really important to get to grips with that early on. So what is your financial model? I don't know if any of you were here at the financial planning. Yeah, some of you were. Yes, I also were here, definitely. But if you weren't here, then there's a video on our website where, what's his name, the guy? Nathan Brown went through the financial planning. He went through it at a bit of a trot, but it's there.
Yeah, slow it down.
Yeah.
Why is he slowing it down?
Yeah, because he had to get through a lot. But it's well worth doing that. It's well worth looking at that financial planning video on the website. And also, I can't remember if any of you were here at the, or not here, but came to the mortgage provider surgeries, and they were really useful as well to talk about how your financial model might work.
And each of the lenders has got, I think there's a short film, isn't there, Amy, on the website, with each of the 4 ethical lenders, like Ecology Building Society and all that.
Yeah.
There will be, sorry. Soon to be.
Okay, so coming on to suitability. So, say for instance you found a site, or you were looking at a site. Is it actually suitable for what you want? That's the first question. And if it is, actually developable. And the developable bit is going to actually we're going to continue the conversation as to what's developable in the next workshop in 2 weeks' time. So we've got a planning and development workshop, which is basically a sort of follow on from this one, in 2 weeks' time in this room, same time. So that's the 20th, I think, of April. To talk more about what that actually means. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about planning because it is actually quite complicated, but just to sort of introduce the idea really that there will be and always going to be some restrictions on what you can do. So the first thing to do is obviously go and have a look at the site, so visual inspection, what's there. And one of the important things, really important things, is the access. So say for instance you've got a building or a piece of land and you want to extend it or you want to build on it. Is the access suitable? Is it wide enough? And if you've got, say, 20 dwellings or whatever, then you'll need a reasonably wide access because you need to get fire engines potentially down there, and also sort of refuse vehicles and that sort of thing. So it needs to be sort of 4 metres wide minimum. We had a look at a site, didn't we, Andrea, where it was a lovely site at the back of someone's house, but there was only about sort of 1.5 metres down the side. So probably to develop that, you would have needed to have knocked down the extension on the side of the kitchen. So, things like that are quite important. And a lot of schemes, I mean, Neil will tell you, a lot of schemes are scuppered by the fact that the access isn't suitable. So it's definitely well worth looking at that. What I mean by curb appeal is how attractive it is. So is it suitable for you? Does it look nice? Is it in a nice area? That sort of thing. Can it be improved if it isn't that nice? Overhead cables, and that's important if you're going to bring if you're going to bring materials in by crane, potentially sort of off-site construction. Can it be craned in? Boundaries. Now, if you've got and Bunker had this, if you've got 6 or 7 people with all boundaries onto your site, then that can cause real complications. So it's well worth looking at that sort of thing early on, because you can get into some real issues with party walls. Existing main services. So on a greenfield site, there probably isn't any services. There isn't water. There might be electricity passing by it, but there probably isn't electricity on the site. There might not be drainage, and those are sort of things that are going to be really expensive to add. So obviously, if you're in the town, you can assume that there's going to be some main services, which is obviously going to make life a bit easier. Rights of light. So if you're in a more of an urban situation, are people very close to the boundaries? And for instance, have they built on the boundary? If they've built right onto the boundary and there's a window there, there's a right of their light, and that's established. So you wouldn't be able to build right up to the boundary there. So you'd have to look at that. And also what I've called neighbourhood grain. So the lower picture, for instance, in the back of that picture, you can see that there's a really high density. So there's flats and buildings that are high. And then this bit in the front is a much lower density. So normally, planners don't like you to change the density too much, or the grain. So say, for instance, you're in, a suburb, like Saltdean or something. That's got a grain, that's got a neighbourhood grain. And if you then put flats in it and lots of high density buildings really close together, that probably isn't going to be doable. So worth looking at that. And then some desk research. And you can also look at some of these things as a desk research as well, looking at Google Street View and Google Maps. Are really interesting and really useful way to do some desk research about the site. Have a look to see whether there might be a possibility of any ransom strips. So in other words, someone who's actually bought some of the access to the site, so that you have to pay them off to get onto your site. And covenants, which might restrict development. So these are all things that can be got over, but they're going to add complications and cost. And as I've already mentioned, potential party wall issues as well. So just going into the planning side a bit of suitability, each building and pieces of land as well have a planning use class. And this has already been decided. So in other words, A1, for instance, planning use class is shops, retail. B1 is offices. C3 is residential. So what you want to be looking at is if, for instance, you're interested in buying an office, or certainly, developing an office, or even a shop, there's certain amounts of what's called permitted development, and you can change your use class without needing planning permission. Normally, if you want to change a use between one use class and another, you would need planning permission. It's sometimes quite difficult to get. But there's permitted development between some. And the government have brought this in to try and free up buildings that are empty. So quite a lot of offices and shops are empty. Why don't we use them for housing? That's the government's view, and I think it's quite a good view. So we're sort of repurposing certain use classes, certain buildings that have been designed for one thing into another. The other thing to just take a note of when you're doing suitability sort of studies is the building or land in a conservation area, or has it got a listing? And what I mean is a heritage listing. So it's grade 1 listed, grade 2 listed. There's quite a lot of buildings and areas in Brighton and Hove that are either in conservation areas or are listed, or in the South Downs National Park. So there's quite a lot of restrictions that are placed on those buildings or land. I think it's something like 25% or 22% of Brighton and Hove is in a conservation area. And I would suggest that you avoid them if possible. because they are really difficult to deal with. Conservation areas are difficult enough. Listings, I would just say no, just don't go there. You can't do very much with them, and it's really complex and expensive to do anything with them. If you do get them, they're beautiful buildings, but they're probably not suitable for us to deal with. Really, it's just too complicated. South Downs National Park, again, I'd say the same thing. But of course, there's
Go Peter.
Yeah, it's going to be complicated, isn't it, Peter? But you never know. So, you never know.
It's more of a research project, yours, in a way, isn't it? To explore what is possible in South Downs within the policy.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of sort of working with the South Downs National Park, I think, involved in that, which is, it's interesting. It'd be good. It's not a simple one. I think it's fair to say. Abnormals. So what I mean by that is anything that's going to add cost and complexity to the development. So contamination and some, for instance, petrol stations. There's quite a lot of them going, but the complications there are contamination and oil. It doesn't have to be like really dangerous chemicals or anything, but it could just be oil that's seeped through the ground over a period of years. There's quite a lot of former landfill sites around East Brighton, of course. They could just keep moving the dump around. So, there's some land there, but it's potentially got methane associated with it and quite dangerous. So, quite a lot of work to do in getting that land to be fit. On the Environment Agency's website about flood risk, because it's on there. There's a map on there about flood risk that are in flood risk areas. Steeply sloping sites, well, again, that's going to add cost because you have to actually make some of the land flat. So there's an excavation to be done there. Potentially there's some cutting into the land and filling to do, so it adds cost. And if you take any soil off of the site, then that's very expensive. Landfill, very expensive now, which is good, it's a good thing.
Of course, you use a method that doesn't need you to cut away the land, like the water seagull timber building.
Yeah.
Builds on stilts.
Yeah.
Designed to build on steep slopes without having to do foundations.
That's right. Yeah. So it just needs a bit more thinking about, but
Innovation.
Yeah, exactly. And services I've mentioned earlier, if there's not services, that's going to add cost. You've gone through your process, you've got your criteria, and you've got a site that's suitable and it's developable, you think, as much as you can. The next stage would be a feasibility study. And this is one that my ex-company have done for a site outside of Brighton Hove in West Sussex. So you can see there that what they've done is they've literally just arranged some buildings, as a way of just seeing whether they can fit the buildings on the site. And they've put a road around the outside, so it's a sort of horseshoe-shaped road that comes, that's the access, horseshoe-shaped road around the outside, and then the buildings are here, and they've all got their gardens, some of them bigger than others, and then there's a communal green in the middle. So, so you can commission this feasibility study from an architect or a designer to produce the sketch scheme. This one here also has landscaping added to it. And it's useful particularly if you're wanting communal areas, communal gardens, that sort of thing, to work with a landscape designer as well as an architect. Also, you might find, if you're particularly on a greenfield site, that you need to do an initial ecology study, because it might be that there's some protected species on there. And obviously there's the sort of badgers, the bats, newts, but there's also some flora that's protected as well. So you need to be very careful about disturbing any of those parts of the ecology of the site. Also, if you're intending to build quite a few units, then you probably need to have a look at the transport and traffic implications of what you're intending to do. The council will certainly want you to look at that. So it might be worth getting an initial study about that done. And of course drainage services and asbestos maybe, if it's an existing building, whether it's got asbestos, because that can be very expensive to get rid of. Okay, so moving on to the third element then, which is the viability. Now this probably shouldn't be done in this order, because you probably needed to have done this earlier rather than doing the feasibility study and then the viability. But it's just to explain that for a project to be viable, you need to have a look at what your tenure is going to be. So in other words, you know, how you're actually going to set out your mix of units, for instance. Is it going to be in a co-op sort of situation? Are you going to be co-housing? Are you going to part own? Are you going to rent off of the co-op? That sort of thing. So you need to sort out that mix and what happens there, and the associated costs and time scale. So you really need a business plan, I suppose. That's what I'm saying. And the site, the cost of the site and the cost of developing the buildings needs to be modelled as an example. So just to state the obvious really, the cost of developing, managing and maintaining the homes shouldn't exceed the income over the course of your business plan. It's pretty obvious really. There are two spreadsheets and appraisal tools that you could use. I'm sure some of you have come across these already. But the CLT appraisals tool, which is the links there, or the Radical Roots spreadsheet. Both of those are good for modelling the finances associated with your development or your project. The CLT, I think, is the one that's simpler, or is it the Radical Roots one that's simpler?
I think it's a more personal preference, isn't it?
The Radical Roots one's the simplest one.
Right, yeah.
But it's almost too simplistic in that it only allows, as far as I can look at, one tenure,
Yeah,
Right.
which is
single
French.
thing.
Right,
Whereas the CLT one, you
Has
can have
multiple
multiple
tenures
tenures,
in
you
the same
have commercial,
development. Yeah,
commercial properties in there,
yeah,
all sorts of
Yeah.
things.
okay.
It's still quite easy though, it's just more complex.
Yeah,
Just to say, we're going to send these slides round afterwards as well, for the links to.
yeah, obviously it's difficult to write down the whole of that
Yeah.
thing. Okay, so I've got a couple of examples here, very, very rough examples of viability. It's almost like the back of a fag packet, really, just to give you an idea that this is the sort of thing you could take away with you and you could start to look at. So if you're looking at refurbishing and remodelling property, so for instance a pub, a disused pub, and this is actually based on this particular pub that was on the market a while ago, not in Brighton Hove, it was in Peacehaven, but it was on the market for 600,000. And I worked out from the very, very quickly from the plans that you could probably get 4 two-bed flats in there. So that's what I'm using as this example, really, because it hopefully makes it a little bit more realistic. But all of these are sort of, as I say, back of fag packet, really, calculations. So you say you buy the disused pub for 600,000, and you've got to convert it. You would have to go through planning for that. You wouldn't be able to do it under permitted development. So there's a bit of time scale there as well. But there's lots of examples of pubs being turned into flats and dwellings, so it probably isn't too contentious. The refurbishment and conversion costs, say 200,000, might be a bit less, hopefully it would, but I'm sort of erring on the side of caution here. So say 800,000 split between, say, 4 families or couples, that's £200,000 each. You have to add in your costs for professional fees, statutory fees and planning applications, building regs, that sort of thing, and any cost of any loans. So say 15% of the 200,000, which is about 30k. So the total cost of that development, of doing that, could be about 830,000. And if you were a co-op, for instance, you could raise that money. You wouldn't need to put anything down necessarily. You could raise that with a mortgage and loan stock, but you would have to. There's a timing issue there, of course, to be able to actually buy that in the market.
So you sort of, if you recall, have to have some loan stock ready.
Ready
if it's
to
on
go,
the market,
yeah.
ready to be sold, you'd have to have your loan stock in hand. You'd have to have your
You'd have to have
20%,
it
because
ready
the
to
mortgage
go.
company will only
Yeah.
lend you 80%, so
Yeah.
you'd have to have your 20% ready to go if something's on the market.
And then developing land. So again, very rough example, back of a fact packet. And this is what developers would do. So this is basically, it's not a community-led housing type of way of looking at it, but it's just useful to see how a developer might look at it and who you potentially might be in competition with to buy any land. So say for instance you've got a piece of land and the site, it costs say £1 million to build, to buy, and then you want to build 10 3-bedroom houses at 100 square metres, and the cost of building those would be around about £1,500 a square metre. It's probably a little bit light actually, but anyway, just to keep it fairly round figures. So you've got £150,000 per house to build, which equals a development cost for 10 of 1.5 million build cost. You've got to add a contingency onto that, and I've said 20% there, which I think is probably about right. Because you just don't know when you start building what you might come up with. So, and there's obviously potentially something in the ground that you might come across, so you've always got to have a contingency. So you've got 1.5 million build cost plus 300,000, so 1.8 million. Say 2 million development cost, just to round it up. And that doesn't include any abnormals, as we discussed earlier. It doesn't include amenities, roads, services, and that sort of thing. But again, it's sort of a round figure. So the total development cost with the land is say 3 million. You've got to add in your costs, professional fees, statutory fees. In this case, the developer would look at sales fees as well, cost of loans. So say £500,000 for that, you've got a total cost of 3.5 million. And then the standard developer would aim to sell those 10 properties for say £500,000 per house. So the total income once they've sold those would be 5 million. And the profit would therefore be, before tax, 1.5 million. It's quite a simple calculation. That 30% is high as a profit. The developers probably would be looking at more like 20% of their profit, which means that, say for instance, what they could do is they could go a little bit higher on the spec for the houses, and they could say go up to, I don't know, £1,800 a square metre for the cost of the houses, or they could bid a little bit higher on the cost of the land. So it gives them a few options. If it comes in at 30% profit, then you know they're laughing and they're thinking, yeah, great, we can go for this. If it came in at £500,000, it would be 10% profit, and they wouldn't bother. Now, obviously, this isn't really what you're going to be doing, but it's just, I thought it was useful for you to see.
It's what you're competing against, though,
It's
isn't
what
it?
you're competing against, yeah. Now, obviously, you don't have to make a profit, so potentially you can just break even, actually. But you're not going to be selling the houses. You know, you're going to be living in them. So that's why it's important to know what you're up against, really. Yeah.
Would that mean that self or custom build means there is a potential 20 to 30% paying less because we are not paying the developers? Is that what it means?
Yes, there is. That's exactly right. But of course, you've got to then make the profit. So you don't have to make a profit, but you've then got to make sure that your income and your expenditure matches over the time of your business plan. So say, for instance, you've got a 20-year business plan, you've got to have broken even over 20 years. Do you see what I mean? So if your expenditure is 3.5 million, then you've got to make sure that all of your income from the rent breaks even after 20 years at 3.5 million. That's really what you're going to be putting into the spreadsheet when you look at the spreadsheet. Yeah.
The principle is clear that self-build can be profitable, but it depends how good you are at developing. So developers are practiced at doing this, so they know how to shave the cost and release that profit. So it really depends on how efficient the self-builders and custom builders are as well. And you can save that further by putting sweat equity in. what was called sweat equity, which is you do stuff that you would normally pay someone else to do. But again, you've got to be good at it, because if it takes you 3 times as long as it does someone you're paying to do it, then it's not efficient in terms of your time, unless you treat your time as 0 cost. So that it's not simple to just say it's really easy to save money doing self-build. You've got to be good at reasonably good at self-build. You've got to think about doing it efficiently, not taking years and years and years.
So people's skills, could that be counted as an asset in terms of working out the
Definitely.
If you're building
Yes,
skills, if
if
they're
you're
relevant to
self-build,
building
yeah.
properties, yeah,
Definitely.
not general
Absolutely,
skills, but
yeah.
Yeah, building skills.
yeah. If someone can do all the stuff around, like when you're paying for materials and it's all coming in, if someone can be running the spreadsheets and keeping a control cost, like an accountant would, or a site,
Or project manager.
a project manager or something, all of those can help.
You've all seen grand designs and what goes wrong.
Exactly.
Every single
exactly,
time.
yeah.
It's all time.
Every single time.
It's always,
and it's always the
time.
windows. Always the windows. Always. Okay, so this is the last slide, I think. So sources of finding properties and land. So there's no sort of magic to this, really. It's just like hard work. You're just going to go and keep on looking. But connections with agents are handy. Obviously, we've got one here, Paul Bonnett. But other types of agents, like commercial agents, these links are actually taken from the council website, Brighton Hove Council website, on business and trade, and then they've got support for businesses, commercial property. There's a whole page about commercial property opportunities. So, and with that, there's a link to commercial agents, and there's like a document that you can download, which has got all the commercial agents on it. So what I would do is I'd just blanket email all the agents and just say, can you put me on your database, please? And tell them what you need. Once you've done that exercise of what you actually need, what your group needs, just email them what you need, and then just keep on following up in case they've forgotten to put you on there. Auctions. Now, it's a bit difficult with auctions because you've got to provide quite a lot of money on the day of, or 3 days? Is it 30 days?
28 days or something.
Is it?
You've got to put the money. You've got to put the deposit down on when you do the deal.
Yeah, you've got to
on
put
the
it down
day.
on the day, the deposit, and then it's got to
28
be
days
completed within
normally.
28 days. So it's a speed thing, and it's obviously going to be difficult for most groups to have that sort of speed. But I think it would be interesting, and I'm going to go along to this auction, because I've been to a few, but it's always really interesting to see what's available, and how it operates, and it's just interesting to see what's out there. So it would be quite interesting for any of you to just go along, just register and go.
But I have a feeling that it costs actually to get there, so you can't just...
No,
You can go to an auction. It's public.
Yeah.
They're public.
You can walk in.
They always say you have to...
You have to register,
Register.
But you don't have to pay.
You don't have
but you don't have to pay. You have to pay.
The
for-
catalogue. You have to pay for the catalogue. If there's one, there's
Well,
a
I
list.
You can download it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I went to one in the Metropole and I didn't pay and I just walked in.
Yeah.
So it's in the Friday ad or whatever, there's one that operates regularly in the Metropole. I forget what it's called. What's it called, that one?
Clive Emerson.
There's Clive Empson, and then there's also the Auction House Sussex, which used to be
You don't have to register.
In
Clive
Inman's?
Empson.
No.
Go along.
no,
I know what you mean.
one at the Seven
No,
Dials.
you just go along.
Austin
The
Gray.
agent, Austin Gray. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's Parsons, Son and Basley as well. So Parsons, Son and Basley, Styles Harold,
Empson.
Emson, and
Yeah, so
they're
there's
the
a
main
few.
local
Yeah, there's
ones.
a few.
Yeah.
Websites and listings. Well, there's obviously Rightmove, of course. Everyone knows about that one. This one is an interesting one. This is again on the council website. So take that down. We will send it to you. But it's worth getting onto that listing because there's commercial properties on those that come up, and they're basically, you can put in your criteria of what you want to receive details of, and it just comes up in a website, and you can then download the particulars. So it's quite a lot of information there, which is worth checking in on regularly. And then the question of council land. This is a bit of a thorny subject because I think anyone who was there at the launch would have probably got the impression that the council were less than keen to give us any land, or not give us any land, but work with us to help us to develop some land. We've been having lots of conversations with them, and what we've discovered is that the only real way that we're going to get anywhere is for everyone to join the self-build register. And you've really got to do this, because this is the only statutory duty that they have to community-led housing is via the self-build register. So if we get a real movement of, say, 400 people on that register, then they've got to do something.
It was closed the other day. You just email, if you look at the website, there's an email address, you just email, say I want to go on the self-build register, they'll send you a set of questions.
It's here under the link here.
The guy said he was very turgid at the self-build workshop and he couldn't do it.
Sorry, we'll have instructions on the website, won't we, Amy, soon? So just follow those instructions, email this particular email at the council, ask to go on. It's really simple, actually. And certainly if you find that difficult, then you probably shouldn't be leading a community-led housing. I'm just going to say that. Before you
Making it easy.
No. But I know and in other local authorities, they're starting to charge people to go on it. So it's free at the moment. So even if you're not thinking of self-building, please go on it. Just put your name on it as an individual, saying you want to build one house. It will help other people who do want to build new, even if you're thinking of refurbishing. And get your friends to do it.
Yeah, just get everyone to do it.
So they do get 400. What do they need to do?
We don't fully like any statutory duty. The local authority has a certain amount of wriggle room, so we don't know what that is. To be honest, we don't know what it'll mean in Brighton. But the chances are, a lot more the more people are on it.
Yeah.
I think if there's a significant number on the self-build register, it makes it easier for people to put pressure on the council to do something, even if they don't know what that is.
Yeah, exactly.
So
they
even
probably
if
don't know what that is.
it kind of forces them to actually devise what
You
strategies
just
they.
say how much demand there is.
Yeah.
I think it would also help the council in terms of defending a planning approval, to say, well, we had to do it because there was the need.
Yeah.
So it works the other way around.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, this is again a link from the council's own website. So if you go into the council website, click on housing, general housing, self-build and custom house building register. That's the link to that page that tells you about how to register. And it tells you all about it as well, and what to do. So. Okay, that's probably, taken.
That's all right. We've got 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
That's
taken half an hour.
If you're happy, Paul, just extend 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes questions on.
Yeah, sure. I'm fine.
So Paul will come on at 10 past. Just 5-minute questions to Nicola. And can I ask that people just ask one question and let other people ask others, so that you won't get a follow-up.
When you gave your example about the self-build land and it came to 3.5 million, is that kind of standard-ish time? I mean, like, that just seems totally impossible.
No. The self-build that we're currently, that's about to go on site in the spring, Bunker, is for a site that will cost, the whole project will cost around 300 grand.
Okay.
It's for 2 3-bedroom houses.
This
But it is using council land.
This is,
So if they had to buy it, say they bought it 3 years ago and started negotiating with the council, they might have paid 60 grand for it. It still would have only been 360 grand, the whole project for 2 3-bedroom houses. So the small plots, there's definitely hope for them. It's just that Nicola's explaining the bigger picture for the big groups with bigger, which is less well known.
If you want to do it more affordably, you're better off building less units. Is that
Not necessarily, because it's complicated. So small sites can sometimes be very expensive per house. Depends how you build, and it depends how much space you put. Like yours, Lilliput, your goal is to build small houses. If you stack them and be creative about how you do it, and you use less land, it'll almost certainly cost you less. I mean, it's all about being creative with that, and you can be if you open your mind to not needing a standard 75 square metered 2-bedroom house.
Yeah, this is a standard developers stacking up, really. You're not going to be doing that. You're going to be doing something else. And
it's also helping to show that why developers are not interested in those little disused garage sites at the back of council houses, and why Bunker was. Because for them, they just want to build 2 houses, but a developer's just going to go, do you know what? There's just not enough money in it.
Okay.
So it's just to give the contrast. There is quite a range, so don't feel despondent that you have to be thinking.
Yeah, don't feel
You don't have to be thinking millions, but yeah.
Thank you.
Holly.
So when you showed the map in the beginning of the periphery of
Yeah.
Brighton, and you were saying there's some fields and stuff in there, why haven't they been built? Are they a goer for looking at, or not?
Most of this is South Downs National Park.
Okay, so
Or in fact, all of it, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of it. So that's why.
okay, and that's. I guess I just need to hone in on that map and have a look closer.
Yeah,
East
there's
Brighton
some
and
urban
stuff,
fringe
right?
sites which aren't on here actually. There's urban fringe sites here. Well, actually, maybe the green ones are the urban fringe sites.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. Sorry. Yeah, the green bits are the urban fringe sites. What that means is that there's about 40 or 50. There were anyway about 48, I think, urban fringe sites which were identified about 2 or 3 years ago by the council as potential housing sites. Some of them are going to be taken or have already been taken for council housing and affordable housing by Hyde Housing. We are talking to the council about some others, but there's no guarantees, promises at all. Some of them have already been started to be developed privately. There's some potential out here in Mile Oak, there's some potential in Patcham, perhaps Saltdean as well, and Ovingdean. So watch this space, because the urban fringe is still up for grabs really to some extent, I think.
Sorry, because I can't see the map. Can you just say where the boundary is roughly on the edges? It goes out to Shoreham.
Yeah, that's Shoreham. That's sort of halfway through Shoreham Harbour. That's Portslade on the west edge of Portslade, and this is Mile Oak. Peter's site is sort of there, isn't it? No, there.
Yeah.
Sort of there-ish. This is Hangleton, Westing, Patcham. Coldine is this little bit here. That's Mulscombe and up towards the stadium. Bevendene, Woodingdean, Ovingdean here, and Saltdean. And it goes halfway through Saltdean, the boundary.
We can send you the map. The map will be in the presentation.
You can have a look at this on the council website.
Are there any more burning questions? Because we do like to keep to time, and the plan is that it's Paul next. But Nicola's going to be around the whole second half after Paul's done his talk as well.
Since I've been doing this job since 1982. I've been running Bonnett since 1990. So got a reasonable amount of experience. Not a lot of experience in land, but selling property in Brighton and Hove, and a place like Lewis, Ringmer, a place like that now and then. The biggest issue really that anyone will have here is actually being in a position to do something when something is available. And you really need to be in a position to do something, and that means having the money. And the biggest problem, for instance, your project is a great project, but the idea of putting 4 properties on the market and selling them so that you've got the money in the bank, so when you see the right property to buy, you're ready to buy it, is a real leap in the dark, and it's the kind of thing that people don't want to do. So if we're talking about people who are sort of trying to realise assets to do something, it's quite a risk. Well, it's not a risk, you just have to sort of go, I'm going to do it. And then you just have to completely commit to doing it. And people don't like doing that. They want to sort of find the property, and then they go, well, I'll put my property on the market now, or I'll get my money organised now that I've found the property or the land. And by the time you've got all that organised, that's disappeared to someone else who's in a position to do it. And quite often, in the kind of projects that you're talking about, that person might well be a developer. And developers, although they don't always have cash, they've got bank money or, loan money which they have access to all the time, and as soon as they see something viable they can jump. And obviously for a lot of people who are selling, the biggest issue is the ability of the buyers to perform, and if you're not able to perform you generally don't get a look in, or you get a look in for a few days and then suddenly you haven't anymore, and it's a pain for the buyer, because and that keeps happening. It happens in the ordinary market all the time. People say, oh, I'm looking to buy. Have you got your property in the market? Are you ready to go? No, but I'm sure I can sell it quick, or I'm sure I can do it. And of course, then something comes up, they want to buy it. By the time they're ready to buy it, someone else has bought it who is in a position. So it's really quite it's an unenviable position to be in, and it's the way the property market works in the UK, as you all know, and probably loads of you know, estate agents always get the blame for this, but it's quite often just sellers who just want to move, and they'll sell to whoever can buy. And so you have to be the person who is the buyer. So finance in place, that's what I had at the top of my heading, and it's already been spoken about, but having some kind of financial ability in place is critical. And so, you know, in your groups, however much it's nice to talk about what you want to live in, what you need to do is discover how you're going to be able to afford it in the first place. So that's really the hardest conversation, but the one that you all need to have in your groups at the beginning to see whether it really is realisable. And then also, if you're going to go into groups where you'll have different kinds of properties in the same building potentially. Say if you were to get hold of an ex-care home or nursing home, because a lot of people who are running those are going, can't make any money out of it now, I'm going to sell it. And so they're a classic, potentially great building, and often have quite big gardens, they often have parking and space, and they have sheds and stuff outside. So they're ideal kind of properties, but you've got to be there ahead of a developer. And also, when you buy it, who's going to live on the first floor, who's going to live on the second floor, who's going to live on the ground floor, who's going to have the garden, are you going to share the garden? You know, so things like that, which when you're all talking about it in sort of pally situation where you haven't actually moved in together, it seems really easy to do. And then when you move in together, you go, why can't I get down to the garden all the time? Or whatever, you know, so really practical things which are going to sort of get in the way of doing it need to be thrashed out at the discussion stage near the beginning, so that when again you go to the people who you want to buy from, you can say, yeah, we're going to buy it, and not only that, we're not going to mess about, we're going to do it. It's quite difficult because you will quite often need building regs permission, you'll need planning permission, potentially you'll need change of use permissions. So there are lots of permissions you need to achieve where someone else might not need those. And so again, you need to try and think, well, will we gamble to buy it when we're not really ready? And that makes it quite complicated as well. So I'm sort of here in front of you going, this is not easy. It really is not easy. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means realism is the name of the game. And like the idea of a plot of land with 10 houses in the country with, you know, and getting your own village shop and pub next door, it's, you know, like, it'd be lovely. And I mean, I know someone in Brighton and Hove who's been looking at these kind of projects, like the old, you know, the older person's post 55 kind of thing, routine, and they are still working on it. They've been talking about it for about 8 or 10 years, and I'm going to try and get them in touch with you guys because they should really be here. And I only discovered about this the other day, so I've spoken to them, and they'll say they'll come to the next meeting hopefully. But going out and getting land, I mean, here, out of the groups here, who are the groups who are trying to get land? And how many groups are prepared to actually just buy whatever, you know, like a building, a big building?
Well, if you can knock it down, that's on the list of questions.
Yeah, can you knock it down? Well, again, can you get planning permission? You know, can you get change of use? Well, probably planning permission. Depends on what kind of building it is. It takes, the process is quite long-winded, isn't it? To sort of to knock something down, get the permission first of all to knock it down, and get the permission to build what you want to do. And also, if you need more services and say roads to come to it, and they'll often say, well, you need to be near X, and you know you need to be near certain kind of shops for us to allow you to build on this land. So that's quite complicated. But I suppose if I talk about the availability, my feeling on availability in the Brighton Hove area is mainly those kind of big, old, sort of nursing home, care home. You know, the Brighton General up Elm Road was sold a few years ago, and that is being turned into there's quite a lot of uses going on up there now. Well, I mean, that's the kind of place which, if you could get hold of something like that, it'd be fantastic. Yeah.
I've been in touch with them. They're telling it's a big developer.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but a lot of it's been done already, hasn't it? So.
Yeah, I think the site's going that way too.
Yeah. So that's the problem. Even though you could possibly pay more money than a developer, maybe not than a big developer because they'll be building maybe 100 flats. But if there's something like 8 flats or 10 flats, you can maybe between 8 or 10 people, you can raise enough money so that you can pay a bit more than the developer will, because the developer's got to make that 1/3 profit. Otherwise, they're not really interested. And you don't need to make profit. You just need to be able to buy it and pay the finance back. So.
What about big society and the kind of right to have community assets or have first dibs on them? Does that have any sway or hold on any of this?
Don't know. Don't think it does it?
You can list buildings as assets in your local area. In my opinion, you probably should be doing that now for anything that you can see around your local area that you don't want to lose, as even if you want it to stay as a pub or a post.
Well, it's like the Cuthbert, isn't it, up Freshfield Road?
Yeah.
Something's happening with that.
Well, no.
No?
We tried, but...
Well, I mean, that was on at one point...
So if you don't want it to be... it depends what kind of thing it is, what kind of asset it is.
Because it does sound like council land, if you could get them to work,
Yeah.
would be really, really good.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it's how to put
Clutton's
pressure
are the
on.
council agents.
Yeah.
So Clutton's website,
Right.
Clutton's are the people, aren't they?
Well, I heard that they weren't anymore.
How's
Hot
that
off the
changed?
press. Yeah, I think they're not anymore.
Sorry.
They lost that contract, I think. But I don't know
Not
who's got
surprised.
it. So,
But the I don't know if Peter wants to interject, but the community rights is the right to bid for it doesn't mean you get any money to do it. You've still got to compete. So it gives you 6 months time to get your act together as a community group and put in a bid and get them raise the money.
The really good thing that you probably do know this, but you'll see a lot of those kind of properties like pubs on the market at prices where you go, really? You know, I mean, the Cuthbert was on £1.1 million undeveloped. Developed, it would only be worth 900,000.
They put it on to stop the community group trying to buy it.
Yeah.
That's why they put it that high,
Yeah.
because as part of a group, we listed it as an asset. We wanted to buy it and take it over as a community asset,
Yeah.
and run it as a community asset. And the people that owned it deliberately then put it on the market at way.
Why were they doing that? Do you know?
Because they wanted originally, we stopped them from turning it into flats. Because we wanted to keep it as a pub,
Yeah.
and run it as a community cafe, potentially with flats in it, but also having a community space. They wanted to get planning permission to turn it into quite a big block of flats, which was vetoed by the local community, who then put the asset status on it to stop that happening. So I think that obviously then they decided to try and sell it at much higher than the community could afford.
Yeah.
So
But the thing is, developers won't pay any old money. They'll only pay money that will give them a profit. So you might find something sits on the market for a while, and then you just go in. If you're in a strong position, you go in with a bid, and they might just go, yeah, that's fine. That's what I really expected in the first place. It's just that people do get unrealistic expectations, and then they have to sort of cut their cloth when.
If you're going to list something as an asset, I'd find out who owns it first and see whether they're favourable to working with you. I think that tends to be the crux of making that situation work.
Yeah. So, I mean, really it's Q&A now more than anything else, because I can't explain much more about it except the fact that you've really got to be in a good position, and you've also got to know exactly how you're going to sort of live in it really between you before you go to the bidding stage for a property. But agents, any residential property will be listed on the portals, you know, like Rightmove or onthemarket.com or Zoopla. All agents are on one or all of those sites. And those properties, they literally list as soon as they get them. But some agents will probably have people who they phone first before they go listing live. And some of those people they call first will be the developers, because they're the people who they hang out with a lot. So you have to sort of get between the estate agent and the developer sometimes. So that's really making friends.
If you saw a piece of land that you like the look of, who would you talk to? Would it be the agents or
Yeah, you
else?
talk to the agent first.
In terms of what permissions you might need, like who?
Yeah, you talk to the agent, and you could probably find out a lot yourself just by looking at what permissions you would need in certain areas. Because mostly, if something's available, there will be. So if you talk about land, it will probably say what permissions you can get with that piece of land. So it won't, you know, if it's just arable land, it can only be sold as arable land. Then you won't want to buy it because you can't, you know, you can dig it up and plant stuff, but that's it. But it will normally say if planning permissions are available on it when it's on the market, and then it'll be obviously a lot more money. But not everyone, the honest truth though is not everyone wants absolutely what the market will bear. Some people actually sell for maybe a little bit below market value just to be involved in a good project. So, you know, not everyone's just follows the dollar. So You know, it's not unknown for people to do that. In fact, I'm just thinking about someone I know who's got an empty care home, and they might actually think, because I only started talking about this with Nicola the other day, and I was just thinking about this earlier. I was sort of thinking he might be interested. You know, so you know, if you know people, you might not think to ask them, but maybe you should ask them, and then discover that you can actually get something going. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Are you saying that if people have got assets in their properties that they own, so they've got, you know, a bit of equity,
Yeah.
are you actually saying that they should sell their properties now and put the money in the bank so that they are ready to go
Yeah.
and live in rented accommodation?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
If you did that, it means that when you buy the property, you can buy the property in the first place,
Yeah.
which is particularly good. You also got the money to spend on it, you know, because you've got the money in the bank. Obviously, you've got to live in rented accommodation, which has cost you X amount for. But you might have to move into rented accommodation if you buy the property, because you might not be able to move into it straight away. So, if you're really committed to doing it, that may be a way forward. It's a bit scary because, you know, you don't want to have that interim thing, but also it means you're not under pressure, because, you know, you're in rented accommodation. You can think, okay, I'll sit tight. When the right thing comes up, I can just go for it straight away.
Can I just, on the back of if that care home owner is ready, what makes a group credible, like to a care, who's going to take them seriously? Because we've been encouraging people to write business cases, have a financial spreadsheet that shows the viability of it.
Yeah.
Is anyone selling going to, is that what they need?
That's
And
partly what they need.
else
They
do
need to know that you've spoken to a finance house if you are borrowing money.
That you've got a
That you've got money, you've got
principal.
a mortgage in principle that you can actually buy now, rather than, you know, well, we've got, you know, 3 properties to sell, it could take us 9 months, we'll make an offer then, because it's just unlikely, isn't it? It doesn't mean they're not going to do it, but it's unlikely they're going to do it. If you can say, actually, you could probably have the money in 3 months from me, you're a good buyer.
So those documents are quite important, and somebody would look at
Well,
them.
also internally they're really important.
Them.
Well, you need to present them to a mortgage company, don't you?
Yeah. We've
For the
said
mortgage
that groups
company.
need them internally, but I'm kind of interested in whether sellers really do look at them closely.
They probably won't look at that much. They'll probably say to the agent, what's the situation with the buyer?
Yeah.
And so if the agent stroke the mortgage advisor stroke the lawyer is able to say they're a good case.
Yeah.
You know, so having a lawyer, maybe having, you know, a local conveyancing solicitor who you trust and who's quite switched on is a good idea as well.
Who can present you well.
Yeah, and one thing, I'm not allowed to say it, don't use online, don't use online agents, because they will do nothing for you, except you think you're saving money, you'll be saving no money at all, because they might not even get you the best price, and they might get you a buyer who can perform, because they don't do the stuff that an agent does, which is, we hassle people, you know, so it upsets them a little bit at first, but then they realise we're hassling them to get the information we need to pass them on as a good case. And if we've got the right information, we can pass them on as a good case, and then they get to buy. And the other side of it is conveyancing, bucket shop conveyancing businesses, which are, you know, in, could be any part of the country, and they have trainee conveyancers working on your case, and they're not the kind of people you need in a situation like this. You need proper conveyancing solicitor, a local one as well, who really knows the ins and outs of leases and freeholds and the property in Brighton and Hove and Bungaroos and all the issues which occur locally, and the local lawyers are used to dealing with and don't run a mile when they hear it. So local solicitors, agents who seem sound to you. I mean, everyone's got a different idea of what a sound agent is, but you know, you should talk to them. And you can ring them all up, and you should probably register individually with agents rather than just on the portals. So it's worth, I mean, people like Clifford Dan might be good to be with, Mansell McTaggart, if you're thinking a bit out of Brighton. Obviously, commercial agents are really important, and also even people like Crick Mays who deal with nursing and care homes.
Crick Mays.
Yeah. So get your name on all their mailing lists.
What was the care home one?
Crick Mays are one of them, but I mean, there are sort of business transfer agents as well, and that sounds like an unusual. Do they still exist? They do, don't they?
Is there like a Brighton Landy agent?
People like Styles. Clive, by the auction house that you talked about earlier. The auction house route is quite often a land route, and also places where there's been a batch of garages that
Mission
they're trying to sell.
the Mission
Yeah, they get a lot of land and new homes. Mission Mackay. Yeah, quite pricey, but you know, they do get quite a lot of land and new home stuff.
What were the other ones you mentioned? What was the other one?
Bachelor Milk House.
Sorry?
Bachelor Milk House.
Oh, yeah, Mansell McTaggart. Oh, yeah, Bachelor Monkhouse, yeah.
For rural.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's another question here.
I was asking you the one you mentioned, but I think you just re-mentioned it. You listed a few.
Mansell McTaggart.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously Graves, Sun and Pilcher. They do a lot of commercial
Graves,
property.
Sun and Pilcher.
Graves, Sun and Pilcher.
Luckily it'd be on the film, won't it,
Styles,
Amy?
you mentioned Styles.
Yeah, Stars Harold Williams, SHW, yeah.
Will these, can you list all these out and add them to the slides that Nicola's going to be sending out?
There's that
So-
that list of agents that I mentioned
Yeah.
that's actually on the
Oh,
Brighton
yeah.
and Hove website.
Lovely.
It has
And
all
the
of
CLT
these.
website.
No, the Brighton and Hove Council
Yeah.
website. Yeah, it has all of these. In fact, I've got it saved. I can
Yeah.
just email it round to everyone. But yeah, it's on there.
Have you, just in terms of how you plan to sort of live it if you're buying as a group, in terms of planning to live in whatever you end up with, have you talked in detail about how you'd manage the sort of communal spaces and how that would work, or is it something you think will just fall out right just because it should?
We've talked in quite a lot of detail about it and looked at sort of common house examples.
Yeah, because I think that's a really critical part of where I said about knowing, especially if you're buying in a building where people will have different amenities depending on what floor they're on and so on. And that's really important.
Are there plenty of those examples about? Can you sort of go online and say, oh, this is model A, this is how that works, this is model B, this is
There are
how that
books, there are all sorts of resources. Yeah,
Right, okay.
There's we're about,
Thanks.
we've got a resource list that
Okay.
lists things like the Diggers and Dreamers website,
yeah,
alternative
so-
communities and things like that.
Yeah.
And there's a few others, and there's a co-housing network who will talk a lot about co-housing examples. You'll see loads of co-housing groups represented there, and
Yeah.
you'll find some of the detail about how they organise themselves there as well. That's on, I think it's nearly ready to be sent out to everyone on the, if you're a CLT member, you'll get it straight away.
Thanks. Any other
We'll
questions?
go out next week,
Oh, yeah.
basically.
If you're looking at back to land, sorry, is it worth getting on the land registry and looking up who owns patches?
Yeah, why not?
Introducing yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know someone who's living off grid, just off a lane on the way to Henfield. He's living in a field of sheep, in a like a sort of, what do you call it, a bothy kind of thing.
Really?
It's brilliant. My brother's mate. It's just crackers. This guy's a builder, and he just turned this shed into a, he's got a what do you call it, a solar panel outside to give him some electricity. He's got a wood burner inside, and it's pretty amazing.
Sorry, has he got planning permission for that, or is
No, it's just, I don't
Is it-
know.
is it-
It's his mate owns the land. He's a farmer,
Right.
and he said you can live there. So he's just living there. Been there about.
So if you
If
own
you're
a
off
variable
5
land,
years
you
now.
can live there.
If
That-
you're
that's
mates with this, if you're mates with this guy.
Well,
you
no,
can
if you're
live
an animal and for a variable land, you can say, okay, I'll just stick my bossy here.
there. Yeah.
Can you do that? 'Cause
No,
I don't know. You
you
can't.
can't.
No, you
No,
can't.
absolutely.
You can't.
You can't in
So-
theory, but if you're off grid, you can move quite quickly. So
Yeah, yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah,
it's not like
exactly.
you're gridded
Yeah.
in. So.
I did
Very
want
good
to ask a
website
question
about
actually
this land is
about
our land.
non-permanent and what's considered temporary dwellings. I know there's a co-housing, a mutual housing scheme in Cornwall, where there were initially some holiday caravans, which they were able to switch from the caravan planning permission to put up log cabins. And they've been in them for about 10 years. And that seems to me, there might be some areas which have got an existing planning permission for something like, caravans, where you could put up a light, sort of living light on the land kind of things that might... Yeah. Well, you may not even need change of use if it's already got that kind of...
There was something the other day on the web that I came across where these people have started building these very small units, and that where you can build them, stack them on top of each other. When you were talking about what you're doing, the Lilliput idea, it reminded me of what I saw. Some just appeared one day on Facebook probably, but last week it was the talk of the day for about a day and a half.
There's one of those in Bristol, and they came under the Caravan Act, so technically it could be moved by a trailer, but
Exactly,
it's
yeah.
massive,
Yeah.
so you wouldn't move it, but
Yeah.
technically it can, so it enabled it to be certain size. But they've got like an example in a community centre, so they've kind of built, I think, like straw insulation, so it's really well insulated, so it's really low energy bills, to try and show, look, we can do a different way of affordable housing.
Well, Brighton Housing Trust, you know, they've got the containers out on beyond New England. It might be worth talking to Andy Winter a little bit.
I've talked to him actually. Yeah, I'm in conversation with him.
Built them.
Yeah.
They are working with us.
They're working with us too.
Yeah, of course. You know, because obviously that's the side, that size, but it could be other sizes, someone like that.
Yeah, it could be.
Of course, in a national park, a lot of these things don't apply. So a caravan isn't even a caravan isn't that easy in a national.
No, I imagine not. No.
If you're not in the national park, I mean, this will be explained more in the next workshop, but there's also changes of use for barns, farm barns as well, into residential, which has just come in, been in a year or so. That's an option. It's a really good option actually, but it's not not in a national park. So.
I think being able to be sort of fleet of foot when something happens, and also when you've got ideas like this and this kind of project, for a lot of people to go, this is a bit out there as an idea to sort of communal living. It sounds like you're going back to the 70s, or when I ran a hippie bookshop. And but it's obviously been going since then, this idea, and now obviously there's a bit of traction. I think it's time probably with what you're doing to actually really dig that traction in, so that people think it's not that way out, it's quite normal. It's funny that a lot of people cycle here, and like people used to go 10 years ago in Brighton, so why would you do it? Now it's what you do.
So actually going back to more traditional ways, isn't it?
Yeah, why not? It's better ways, in a lot of ways.
I just want to invite anybody who hasn't asked a question so far, if they just need the space to do it.
If you found a piece of land that wasn't on the market yet, would it be worth talking to someone, an agent, to ask if they would approach the owner to, as an intermediary rather than try? Well, yeah.
I don't know if that.
I don't know. I just don't.
I think you might go direct, to be honest. But the problem with going, you might start direct, engage, and then say, but I'd like to put someone between you and me now.
Yeah.
And they may want to do that as well. But that person wouldn't necessarily have to be. It just has to be someone who can sort of communicate well, but needs to know the sort of the ups and downs of it. But I don't think you would want to necessarily call the nearest agent, because it could turn out someone who immediately think, well, what can I own out of this? They'll immediately be thinking about what.
Going to invite Neil to say something about that, because that's what you do, Neil, isn't it?
Yeah, I do that. I find sites for developers, housing associations, other community land groups, with varying degrees of success, and as people have been saying, it does just slightly tend to fall down on the basis of the fact that there's no money immediately available within the timescales. But I think there's nothing wrong with approaching the vendor or the landowner directly if you've established who they are from the land registry, or actually you see it, you just knock on their door, and have a chat with them. And if you need somebody to represent you who's got a bit more confidence perhaps, or has knowledge of the system, then get somebody. And I wouldn't go to necessarily to an agent. I think that you're sort of costing yourself money unnecessarily then, really, aren't you? And potentially losing the site to the agent who can seek a better offer from somebody else.
One thing that happened in Brighton many years ago, the earthships they got the planning permission down by the Marina 16. Brilliant. We were involved in that, and we helped contribute towards his costs of getting his planning permission, because he said he was going to put them with us when he got them. And he got the planning, then the council had to go to the market with the land because they hadn't bought the land. And of course the council went to the market with the land, and they couldn't afford to buy it. So they had the planning permission, but they didn't have the land anymore. So you need to have the money.
So, and it is a little bit tricky that way. It is a bit of a
really
sharp
difficult.
pit. So going to someone and it's good to get advice. I think it's always good to have an ally that knows what happens in those sorts of situations before you.
And also not to be too hung up about a site, because I know what I was saying earlier, that you need to make sure it's the right site for you, but if you really set your heart on a site, and you can't really do that emotionally, because I think there's a really big chance that it might not happen. So you have to have your fingers in quite a few pies, I think.
Peter,
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the Community Land Trust in principle is very interested in the idea of finding a way of making available a revolving fund for purchasing land because of precisely this issue. We have no idea how we're going to do it, and if somebody wants to work on it with us, then that would be interesting.
If I get Robin talking,
Yeah,
he's
great.
got a brain for numbers, I'll tell you. It's incredible.
Yeah, great,
Incredible.
thank you.
You mentioned earlier having a story or words to that effect is a good thing. So having, persuading people that this is a good cause.
Yeah, I think it's really important. In a way, you do need to. So in other words, you've knocked on someone's door, and you can say, I don't want to talk about it for a long time, but this is our idea. Can I ring you tomorrow? Or get them to ring you tomorrow. Say I'll ring you and get their number, because then you get to talk to them again. And they may read that and go, that is a great idea, and I'll get the money I need if I sell it to them. So yeah, I think putting it in a little frame and having all the plan and everything, I think is really good. And being flexible, obviously, as well in terms of what you're looking for. Just because you want to buy land in the country with a great view of the downs, don't have that as your only choice. Just be you. You might need to be a bit pragmatic.
Yeah.
And also, what's the word? Talk about innovation. You might see a bungalow and think that wouldn't work, and then you think, actually, no, that could work really well if we do X, Y, and Z with it. Okay.
Anyone else that's got a question just needs a bit of space to ask it?
So when you talk about the land, let's say you manage to get hold of some land, you put some temporary building on it, like containers, or can you get away with it, or is it regulated? A lot of people do, in their gardens, they build the small sheds, which bypasses any planning.
I think if you did that with something you were trying to get planning permission on, it might get in the way of getting permission because they might not like you doing that.
Right.
No, you need permission. Right? You need permission.
Yeah, if you started doing that to start with, they might go, we're not going to give you permission just because you've broken the rules before.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely not allowed. It's different if you're in the curtilage of a domestic property. Then you can put, as you say.
Explain what curtilage is.
Sorry, curtilage is basically the boundary, really. The boundary. If you in your garden, like you rightly say, you can put a shed, or it's called an annex, and work from there or whatever. You don't need planning permission for that, but it's because it's in your own land, and it's a domestic use, and it's allied to the house, the home. If you just had a piece of land somewhere and just plonked a container on it, that's a completely different thing. And I mean, to be honest, the planners probably wouldn't know unless someone actually told them, because they don't sort of go round and look, and they haven't got the resources to do that. But you can bet your life that someone would complain. So and it might even be someone's piece of land, so then that they're going to be complaining. So yeah, you can't do that. But this sort of thing will be discussed more in the planning workshop in a couple of weeks. So yeah.
On that,
join it very soon.
we've got a tea break now.